A games journalist over at Digital Trends is very upset about how gamers are discussing Clair Obscur. In his recent article, Can We All Just Be Normal About Clair Obscur?, Giovanni Colantonio takes aim at the way fans are reacting to Expedition 33. But rather than offering meaningful insight, he spends most of the piece dismissing valid praise, misrepresenting reasonable criticism, and ultimately rushing to protect the same AAA studios that keep proving they don't deserve your trust or your money. One of the most defensive parts of the article centers on Clair Obscur's turn-based combat, and the way it's been embraced by fans of the genre. The author seems frustrated for two reasons. First, he doesn't like that Clair Obscur is being held up as a shining example of why turn-based systems are still viable in modern high-budget RPGs, and second, he thinks the concern that turn-based combat is dying is overblown. He writes, quote, "For years now, some RPG enthusiasts have lamented the death of turn-based games. That anxiety seemed to come most from franchises like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest experimenting with real-time action. Clair Obscur is a loud, proud, turn-based game, which made it the perfect spoiler candidate for an industry abandoning a classic way of play. Never mind the fact that turn-based gaming hasn't gone away. Octopath Traveler 2, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, and Metaphor ReFantazio prove that major studios are still very much invested in the subgenre." Close quote. But this framing completely misses the point. The concern isn't that turn-based games have disappeared. It's that they've been systematically sidelined from the flagship series that once defined them. Publishers like Square Enix haven't abandoned the model entirely, but they've increasingly relegated it to smaller projects while pushing real-time action in their tentpole titles. Final Fantasy and even Dragon Quest have distanced themselves from the turn-based systems that once made them iconic. And this isn't a coincidence. It's a calculated marketing decision. Despite the fact that Final Fantasy became a global phenomenon with turn-based mechanics, someone in the boardroom clearly decided that those systems no longer had mass appeal. After Final Fantasy X, the franchise pivoted towards real-time hybrid systems. And that pivot came at the cost of the tactical depth and pacing that made older entries so beloved. So yes, fans were absolutely right to worry about the direction of the genre. And Clair Obscur resonated because it dared to show what was still possible. It didn't just recycle turn-based combat, it elevated it, proving that with modern presentation and thoughtful design, the format can be just as cinematic and emotionally rich as anything real-time. And just to be clear, Clair Obscur isn't the only example fans point to. Games like Persona 5, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, and Metaphor ReFantazio are also part of this conversation. They prove that turn-based systems, when treated with care, can thrive both critically and commercially. Clair Obscur just happens to be the most recent success story that drives that point home, especially because of its stunning presentation and modest budget. So when fans hold it up as a blueprint for the future, they're not weaponizing it, they're responding to a very real and persistent trend, one that this article seems oddly invested in dismissing. Next, the article tries to take Clair Obscur down a peg by pushing back on the idea that it was made by just 30 people. Quote, "Articles popped up that praised the studio for creating such an accomplishment with only 30 people, a figure that was quickly debunked once critics started adding up all the external developers involved." Close quote. This framing is wildly disingenuous for a few reasons. First, outsourcing is completely standard in modern game development. Nearly every studio, indie or AAA, contracts external help for asset creation, voiceover, localization, QA, and more. No one who understands the industry considers this deceptive. Second, Sandfall didn't push the 30-person miracle narrative. That came from journalists and commentators, many of whom were justifiably impressed by what the internal team managed to pull off. Jeff Keighley mentioned it at Summer Games Fest, and gaming outlets and enthusiastic fans just repeated it. Sandfall themselves didn't build a marketing campaign around it. But more importantly, the author completely misses the point yet again. The heart of the issue isn't the number of people who worked on the game. It's how much Sandfall accomplished with comparatively little. Clair Obscur was developed on an estimated budget of between $20 and $30 million. That's pocket change in today's industry, where the average AAA budget is well north of $100 million. To put that in perspective, Final Fantasy VII Remake reportedly cost between $140 and $200 million, with Rebirth and Final Fantasy XVI being even more expensive. That's what makes Clair Obscur's achievement so remarkable. With a fraction of AAA money, Sandfall delivered a game that looks, sounds, and plays like something 4 times its cost. That kind of outcome doesn't come from headcount. It comes from sharp direction, efficient production, and a clear creative vision. So yeah, it makes perfect sense why players are asking the obvious question. How can a relatively unknown studio with a tiny budget deliver something this polished and memorable while so many AAA teams keep pumping out bloated, buggy slop for 10 times the cost? Lastly, in the most infuriating portion of the piece, the author claims he's tired of gamers using individual successes or failures to push sweeping industry narratives. He writes, quote, Baldur's Gate 3 inspired a wave of talking points about what players actually wanted from games. That line of thinking was met with backlash from developers who cautioned against using a very specific win as a crusade. Black Myth Wukong became a rejection of Western ideology. Concord was viewed as proof that live service games are dead. Close quote. He presents this as an issue of fans misreading the room. But here's the problem. Those narratives didn't just spring up out of nowhere. In most cases, they were shaped or even instigated by the media and developers themselves. Take Black Myth Wukong. It didn't represent a rejection of Western ideology until IGN accused the developers of sexism over a mistranslation and then refused to acknowledge the error. Fans being upset by this isn't them inventing a narrative, it's them responding to one from games media. And then there's Concord. The article treats it like an unfair scapegoat, like overzealous gamers just latched on to a random title to attack live service games. But that framing isn't just wrong, it's borderline gaslighting. Concord wasn't the start of some overreaction. It was the latest in a long, embarrassing parade of live service flops. Anthem, Marvel's Avengers, Babylon's Fall, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. The list goes on. Each one promised innovation and long-term support. Each one crashed and burned. By the time Concord showed up with its soulless marketing, forgettable characters, and copy-paste vibe, it wasn't met with irrational outrage. It was met with exhaustion. Gamers didn't invent this narrative, the industry did. Concord just happened to be the final straw. So when a journalist rushes to defend this type of soulless slop, it's hard not to wonder, who are you really speaking for? Because it's certainly not gamers. The article accuses fans of turning Clair Obscur into a symbol instead of engaging with the game itself. But in the same breath, it dismisses almost every meaningful conversation surrounding the game, from its stunning use of turn-based combat to the miracle of its budget, while shifting focus towards defending AAA studios that are constantly failing upward. And that's what's so frustrating. It's not just that the arguments are bad, it's that they're coming from someone who's supposed to be part of the critical apparatus. A journalist should be skeptical of corporate bloat and creative stagnation, not racing to shield it from scrutiny. But instead of interrogating how a 30-person core team created something this memorable on a shoestring budget, the article scolds fans for asking the obvious question. Why can't the rest of the industry do better?